This is the Tsar Bomba, the most powerful weapon ever built by human hands. Set it off and everything within 22 miles is gone. Not damaged, gone. That's a circle of total destruction wider than the entire island of Manhattan from tip to tip. The designers had 16 weeks to build it, and they didn't have time to finish the math that tells you whether it actually works. The day it was scheduled to go off would be its first test run. In the summer of 1961, Khrushchev summoned his top physicists to the Kremlin and told them what he wanted: the biggest bomb ever built, 100 megatons. To put that in perspective, every bomb dropped in World War II, every shell fired, Hiroshima and Nagasaki included, all of it totaled about 3 megatons. Khrushchev wanted 35 times that in a single weapon, and he wanted it ready before the 22nd Party Congress opened in October. 16 weeks to build Doomsday. He called it Kuzka's Mother, a Russian idiom that roughly translates to the lesson you'll never forget. He'd already used the phrase at the United Nations. Now he was putting actual megatons behind it. And here's the problem. He already told foreign dignitaries the test was happening. He committed the entire Soviet Union to a deadline for a bomb that didn't exist yet. But Khrushchev didn't know that the man he just ordered to build it had already tried to stop the entire test program, with a handwritten note passed across the table. Andrei Sakharov, the father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb, handed Khrushchev a written note at the meeting objecting to the resumption of nuclear testing. Said it would cause irreparable harm to the world. Khrushchev was furious. He reportedly told others, "If we listened to people like Sakharov, I'd be a jellyfish, not a chairman of the Council of Ministers." Then he ordered Sakharov to build the bomb anyway. And honestly, what else was Sakharov going to do? He was the only person in the Soviet Union who could design this thing. He chose to stay. The weapon was designed here at Arzamas 16, a closed city in central Russia so secret it didn't appear on any map, with its own postal code, own security perimeter, and a population of physicists who couldn't leave without government permission. 12 weeks remained. The math wasn't done. The fabrication teams were already cutting metal. The authorities didn't trust typists, literally wouldn't let them in the building. So every report was written by hand with code words masking everything classified. You want to talk about neutrons? You write 0 points. That was the actual code word. Think of it as a company town, except the product is thermonuclear weapons, and not just any run-of-the-mill nuclear weapons, but something called a hydrogen bomb. Such a bomb has multiple steps, and this matters because what Sakharov did was way harder than the standard version. Step 1. You set off a regular nuclear bomb, splitting atoms. That's the fission part, your match. Step 2. The insane heat and pressure from that explosion crushes hydrogen fuel so hard that the atoms fuse together. That's the fusion part, your gasoline. Every hydrogen bomb ever built uses those 2 stages. 1 trigger, 1 payload. Tsar Bomba has 3. A 2-stage bomb maxes out around 15 megatons. Castle Bravo, the biggest bomb America ever set off, hit 15. And that took months of preparation on a dedicated Pacific island. To go higher, you need a 3rd stage that uses the energy from stage 2 to ignite an even bigger fusion reaction. A bomb lighting a bigger bomb, lighting an even bigger bomb. The largest bomb the Soviets had ever tested was 2.9 megatons. Sakharov's team was trying to jump to 50, a factor of 17 in a single untested shot. No country on Earth had ever attempted anything close. But here's where things get really insane. To make that 3rd stage ignite, you have to crush it from every direction at the exact same moment. The 3rd stage was about 2 meters across, roughly the size of a large oil drum. If the compression is even slightly uneven, the whole thing fizzles. 50 megatons becomes a very expensive, dirty firecracker over Soviet territory during the Party Congress. Sakharov's solution was something called the bifilar scheme. Instead of 1 second-stage charge, he used 2, placed on opposite sides of that massive 3rd stage, front and back, squeezing it from both ends at once. Picture 2 freight trains hitting a watermelon from opposite ends of a tunnel, except both trains need to arrive within 100 nanoseconds of each other, and nobody tested the tunnel. That's faster than a camera flash, faster than you can blink. And this synchronization had to work inside a device with no microprocessors and no digital controls, just analog circuits, shaped explosives, and geometry. Nobody had done it before. Nobody's done it since at this scale. And here's the kicker. The synchronization hardware wasn't even built at Artemis 16. A completely separate facility called KB-25 built the electronic timer. Chelyabinsk 70, a rival nuclear lab, engineered the bomb casing. 3 different institutions, each building their piece of the puzzle, shipping it to one location with 0 time to check whether the pieces fit together. If KB-25's timer was off by a tenth of a microsecond, the most expensive experiment in Soviet history would fizzle on the world stage. And every physicist on the project knew exactly what Khrushchev did to people who embarrass him. Now remember, they were building this thing while still designing it. 16 weeks doesn't give you the luxury of finishing blueprints before you start cutting metal. The fabrication teams assembled the bomb on a railroad flat car inside a workshop built over a rail line. When they finished, they'd tear down the workshop and disguise the flat car as ordinary freight. But the assemblers were working from specs that kept changing. Sakharov's team was building components before the math was done. Sakharov joked to his team, "If we don't make this thing, we'll be sent to railroad construction." His co-designers Ademsky and Smirnov pointed out this was a marked improvement over the Stalin era. Back then, weapons designers who failed didn't just get reassigned, they got reassigned to the afterlife. 2 weeks before the test, it nearly fell apart. A colleague ran his own numbers and became convinced the design would not work. Worst part, he didn't tell Sakharov first. He told everyone else on the project. By the time Sakharov got back from Moscow, the corridors at Artemis 16 were buzzing with doubt. October 24, 6 days before detonation. The bifilar scheme had never been tested. The electronic timer had never been synchronized with the bomb casing. And 5 physicists were stacking their lives on approximations they couldn't prove. The final report was finished and rushed to the assemblers. It contained one line that would prove prophetic. A successful result opens the possibility of creating a device of practically unlimited power. If the synchronization held, that sentence would rewrite nuclear weapons forever. If it didn't, 5 physicists would share the blame. The physics was the hardest part, but Sakharov was about to face a problem no equation could solve. At full design yield, 100 megatons, the number Khrushchev demanded, the fireball punches past 34,000 feet. That is the exact altitude the bomber flies at, not near it, the exact same altitude. No amount of engine power or reflective paint saves anyone on board either aircraft. At full yield, this is a one-way trip with a propaganda objective. Sakharov knew it. He was designing a weapon that required a crew to carry it to their own destruction, unless he changed something fundamental about the physics. At the mid-August review, about 4 weeks in, he made the decision that changed everything. In a normal hydrogen bomb, the stuff surrounding the fusion fuel is uranium-238. When the fusion reaction throws off fast neutrons, those neutrons hit the uranium and it splits, adding its own energy to the blast. The tamper, as they call it, effectively doubles the yield. But every atom that splits becomes radioactive debris, the kind that catches a ride on stratospheric winds, drifts across continents, settles into soil, and lodges into bone marrow for decades. Sakharov swapped the uranium for lead. Lead doesn't split, it absorbs neutrons like a sponge. One material swap and 3 things happen at once. Yield drops from 100 to 50 megatons. Radioactive fallout drops by 97%, and the fireball shrinks just enough that it doesn't catch a bomber at full power. The Americans had done something similar after Castle Bravo, called it the material substitution method, but nobody tried it at 50 megatons. Whether lead actually behaves the way math predicts at those energy levels was exactly that, a prediction, not a proven fact. And that margin is paper thin. The fireball at 50 megatons reaches nearly the altitude of an aircraft. Nearly. That's the word that decides whether 14 people will come home or not. The 50-50 survival estimate was calculated after Sakharov halved the yield. 50-50 was the good number. The lead swap doesn't fix everything either. The bifilar scheme has never been tested. And the way those 2 charges interact with the 3rd stage at this scale exists only in approximations the team couldn't finish. If the yield overshoots 50 megatons by even a few percent, every extra megaton pushes the fireball closer to the aircraft. The margin between survival and incineration lives inside math they ran out of time to prove. And that wasn't the only thing haunting Sakharov. Before this project, he'd published a number that followed him for the rest of his life. Every megaton detonated in the atmosphere would cut roughly 6,600 lives short worldwide over a generation. Not from the blast, not from the fireball, but from invisible particles, strontium and radioactive carbon settling into bone marrow, altering DNA, triggering cancers decades later in people who would never know what caused them. He's about to set off 50 megatons. By his own math, 330,000 invisible future casualties. That's the clean version, the one he fought for. The 100 megaton design with uranium would have produced roughly 660,000. He halved the yield and halved the human cost. 97% clean fusion with only 1.5 megatons of fission from the primaries. The cleanest weapon ever tested at this scale. But clean is doing a lot of heavy lifting when you're talking about 50 megatons. The survival math depended on one more thing nobody was sure about: a parachute. But what the crew didn't know yet was that the single piece of equipment standing between them and incineration had been stitched together from nylon commandeered from the Soviet hosiery industry. 1,600 square meters of nylon, bigger than 3 basketball courts stitched together, weighing 800 kilograms. Building it disrupted the entire Soviet nylon hosiery industry. They commandeered the production lines for a single shoot. But there's a problem with nylon. At minus 56 degrees, nylon gets brittle. If it tears on deployment, the bomb reaches detonation altitude in under 60 seconds instead of 188. 14 men stop being a crew and start being a footnote. If a safety inspector saw the full flight plan, he'd retire on the spot. The weapon was ready. Whether anyone survived dropping it depended on a gutted bomber, a frozen parachute, and a crew that knew the math gave them a coin flip at best. Engineers spent weeks gutting the Tu-95V and rebuilding it around a single weapon. Bomb bay doors, gone, because the AN-602 stretches 26 feet long and nearly 7 feet across, way too big for any internal bay. Imagine strapping a school bus to the belly of an airplane, except this one weighs 60,000 pounds and is designed to level anything within 20 miles. Fuselage fuel tanks, gone. Pulled to save weight, meaning less fuel on a mission where the return trip matters as much as the drop. The entire release mechanism was worn out and replaced with custom hardware for a weapon 3 times heavier than anything this plane was designed to carry. None of it tested at altitude. What's left is 27 metric tons hanging through a hole in the belly, dragging against the airstream in a way the engineers never planned for. And the Tu-95 doesn't have ejection seats. Standard bailout involves a conveyor belt in the cockpit floor. A literal conveyor belt that feeds crew members through a nose-wheel bay hatch. The Tu-95's emergency escape system was a conveyor belt in the floor. Soviet aerospace engineering at its most Soviet. But the nose-wheel bay is packed with attachment hardware. If something goes wrong on this flight, the crew doesn't bail out. They ride it down. Major Andrei Dunovtsev advances the throttles at Olenya Airfield, Kola Peninsula. 4 NK-12 turboprops spool to takeoff power. The Tu-95 rolls down the runway, dragging 60,000 pounds into the Arctic sky. Behind it, a Tu-16 observer plane lifts off with 5 scientists and the same untested white paint covering both aircraft. The flight engineer is already watching fuel gauges moving faster than predicted. The drag from that protruding weapon pushes burn rate 30% above normal. He runs the return leg 600 miles to Olenya, 4 engines at cruise, headwind. The math comes out with a question mark where the reserve should be. At any normal Air Force, that's an automatic abort. In the Soviet nuclear program, that's Tuesday. He keeps that number to himself. At 34,000 feet, the ride gets worse. The airframe starts shaking. Arctic air slamming the flat face of a weapon that was never supposed to hang in the slipstream. A low vibration the crew can feel through the deck plates. Nobody tested this configuration at cruise altitude. The navigator hand flies the bombing math because no bomb site in the inventory fits this weapon. He feeds Dunovtsev corrections for wind and a trajectory complicated by the parachute. A 5-knot crosswind shifts 1,600 square meters of canopy sideways during descent, changing where the fireball ends up. The escape geometry was calculated for a detonation that might happen somewhere else entirely. 60 seconds to release. Brewy runs the fuel one last time. Single attempt return. No go around. No alternate airfield in the Arctic. One chance. Detonation holds heading. He knows the fuel number. He knows the vibration. He holds. At 11:30 Moscow time, Kletch calls the mark. Detonation confirms. The release mechanism fires. Explosive bolts punching through hardware that has been shrinking in sub-zero air for 2 hours. Steel contracting in mounts built in a workshop and never tested at altitude. For a fraction of a second, nothing happens. The bolts have fired, but the weapon hasn't moved. The cockpit holds its breath. Then 27 metric tons surrenders to gravity. The lugs clear. The AN-602 drops free, and the Tu-95 lurches upward as 60,000 pounds vanishes in a heartbeat. Behind the aircraft, the parachute snaps open. Frozen nylon at minus 56 degrees, stretching taut. It holds. Then come the longest 188 seconds of their lives. Detonation slams the throttles to the firewall, and all 4 NK-12s scream to maximum power. Contra-rotating props clawing at thin air. The noise inside the cockpit climbs past communication into something physical, something you feel in your teeth. The Tu-95 banks hard south, while the Martyenko's Tu-16 spools toward redline on a diverging heading, away from the weapon and away from home. 100 seconds. The bomb descends through 22,000 feet, 15 miles of separation. Not enough. Brewery watches engine temps climb past numbers you'd normally pull power for. Exhaust gas on engine 2 past the red line. Oil pressure on engine 4 dropping. Today, the red lines are just suggestions. 150 seconds, 22 miles. Inside the bomb, barometric sensors register thickening atmosphere. No human hand touches the weapon. The physics run their own clock. 28 miles, 8 seconds left. 188 seconds. The altimeter reads 13,000 feet. The arming circuit completes. The fission primary fires. The 3-stage sequence takes microseconds. Fission crushes the primary. X-rays hammer the lithium deuteride. Fusion kicks in, and the energy from that second stage slams into the massive third stage from both ends. The bifilar charges that 3 institutions built across 16 weeks of unfinished math, firing with intolerance on the first and only attempt. 50 megatons in a fraction of a microsecond. White light floods the cockpit from below, through the floor, through closed eyelids. At 24 miles, the shock wave. The aircraft doesn't shake, it drops. 3,300 feet straight down in a single lurch. Every crew member wrenched against their harnesses. Something snaps in the tail section. Brewery's eyes lock onto the engine gauges, all 4 holding. Detonation hauls the yoke back and fights it level. The plane's belly scorched black where the paint burned through. Martyenko's Tu-16 takes the hit too. The overpressure shoves his jet 2,600 feet. 5 scientists in back experience what no amount of theoretical physics prepares you for, the math becoming real. 400 miles back in a damaged aircraft, fuel gauges showing numbers Brewery has never seen on a mission that was still flying. Both crews land on visual approach. Both walk off the flight line on their own legs. The paint on the belly of the Tu-95 is still warm to the touch when the ground crew reaches it. The 3-stage design proved that morning became the engineering foundation for every modern thermonuclear warhead. The physics that makes a compact warhead work on top of an ICBM, the kind sitting in American silos and Russian submarines right now, was validated by this single test. Sakharov never built another weapon after this. He spent the rest of his life campaigning against everything he'd made possible. In 1975, they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize. The Kremlin wouldn't let him leave to accept it. If you enjoyed this video, watch our other video on America's most powerful bomber. Bye for now.